Welcome to the Dealmaker Uncut podcast, where we speak to some of the UK's most exciting entrepreneurs and hear their investment journeys. We'll discuss the challenges, successes and lessons they've learned along the way, with expert deals commentary from Jonathan Boyers, Head of Alvarez & Marsal Corporate Finance, and me, Chris Maguire, Executive Editor at Business Cloud. Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Dealmaker Uncut podcast, powered by Alvarez & Marsal. My name is Chris Maguire. I'm the Executive Editor of Business Cloud. As always, I'm joined by the dealmaker himself, Jonathan Boyers. Jonathan's been involved in deals totaling over £5 billion during his long career, and he's now the Managing Director and Head of Alvarez & Marsal's Corporate Finance practice in the UK. Big welcome to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
And we're surrounded by gifts, and in a second you're going to reveal who exactly has given us those gifts. I do need to start off by thanking the very, very clever people at What Media who produced the Dealmaker Uncut podcast. They're the kings and queens of video creation, and without them we couldn't produce this blockbuster of a podcast. The Dealmaker Uncut podcast has already got listeners all over the world, and we've entered podcast charts in several countries as well. You've clearly got a big family, Jonathan, so pleased about that. In today's show, we're going to interview our very special guest, and after the break, I'm going to ask you some questions that we've been sent in by our dear listeners. So, Jonathan, who are we talking to today?
Well, today, Chris, we're going to be talking to Graham Donoghue, the CEO of Forge Holiday Group, and also, it transpires, part-time beekeeper.
Which explains the honey. Welcome to you, Graham.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jonathan.
If some people think that you can buy interviewers, okay, and you have successfully bought us, so you can talk about whatever you want. I'm going to talk about Forge Holiday Group, but it's not your first rodeo. You've been involved in lots of other businesses as well. Just explain a bit about, because you've been involved in lots of deals before, so just explain some of the deals you were involved in before you became the CEO of what was Sykes Cottages, now become Forge Holidays.
Yes, I mean, I've had three big roles, I think, in my career over like almost 30 years working in digital. I was lucky enough to work for Thomson Holidays, who then became TUI. For 7 years, I was the digital director at a very young age. They put me on the board when I was 30 to be that rather annoying sort of individual that could educate a retail environment mostly about the internet. During that time, I was involved in lots of deals. You know, the biggest was probably when we merged with First Choice, which was a pretty big deal at the time. But I was involved in buying Late Rooms, which was a Manchester-based, online travel comfortable hotels. I was also involved in buying Coventry Airport, randomly, and involved in lots of different things, directly involved in the tourism business. And then I moved there and went to a very entrepreneurial business, which was Monday Supermarket, run by Simon Nixon, and they had just IPO'd the business when I joined. And it was a PLC, so a very different environment, operating within a very different way of looking at deals. We probably turned down more deals than we actually acquired, but I guess the biggest one there was Money Saving Expert, where we acquired a business from Martin Lewis.
Martin Lewis is also born on the 9th of May, 1972, as am I. I'm going to sit there.
Very good. Okay, so I was very much involved in that deal, which was an interesting deal. It took a very long time to get that deal because it was just
80 million, wasn't it?
87 million it was, yeah. Yeah, and it worked out incredibly well because a lot of it was cash and some of it was shares in terms of structure, and the share price grew enormously. And then obviously, post that, I was involved in Sykes, and I joined in 2016.
I'm just going to set the scene. Forge Holiday Group, 33,000 properties, handles 700,000 annual bookings a year, 1,800 staff, transacts more than £500 million a year. Just give us a sense of the company and some of the brands that exist within it.
It's really four divisions, and what it is now, I mean, it's very different from when it was, which is when actually Jonathan helped back in 2015, the founder, Clive Sykes, sell the business. So there's four divisions. There's an agency business where we look after 22,000 properties on behalf of property owners. People have a second home mostly in the UK. We then have an operator business where we have almost 800 cabins in the UK public forests, business called Forest Holidays. And different business there, that's the one where we work with the Forestry Commission. We identify land and then we build and we own the assets effectively in the forests. Then we have another business, which is a caravan business, where we have 7,500 caravans, where, a bit like an agency business again, we look after caravans on behalf of people who own caravans in the UK, with the largest agency there. And then we have an international business. But obviously that's very different from when I joined in 2016, where it was 5,000 properties, and obviously owner-led or founder-led, Clive Sykes.
So Graham, you became the CEO of Sykes Cottages as it was in 2016. And as you say, I was involved in helping the family. It was a family business, helping the family sell that business, and it was sold to Living Bridge. And there was a great example here of a transition from a family-owned and family-run business to a business bought by private equity, and then transitioned through to a professional management team. So I'm interested in your experience when you joined that business. It had recently been acquired, and that journey had just started. So how you landed in the business, and just talk a little bit about that situation and that transition.
Well, prior to that, I had no experience in private equity whatsoever. So it was like a bit of a baptism of fire. And for me, my experience is, PLC or, large sort of, organizations. And so I had actually finished Money Supermarket. I was on that classic garden leave, where I was spending a lot of time getting to know my family again, if I'm honest. Here you are familiar. Get to know my family, getting to know my garden. And then I had a call from a headhunter who sort of said, have you heard of this business called Sykes Cottages? They've recently taken some investment, and they could do with some help in terms of scaling and professionalism. And I did that classic, I'd heard of them, but how big are they? And, if I'm honest, at first I was like, this is really small, really quite tiny. But I went and I met the founder, who I liked. And, a big part of it for me is about liking people I work with. And I then went to London, and I met the private equity organization, Living Bridge, and got to understand a bit more about sort of private equity. And what was important for me was to understand, what happened, because there was a CEO when the acquisition happened, and then suddenly this CEO was moving on. Why? What was the story? And I think what I discovered is there was a life-changing amount of money that had, as often happens, as had sort of passed from one role to another role, and then it was hard to make that transition. They were looking for someone to come in and sort of help with the rigor that probably are required in private equity in terms of thinking about long-term planning, having more corporate governance, more structure, being on your numbers, doing what you say. And then when I joined and came into the business, that pretty much was my role to come in, was to take the plan they had and really think about how do we execute that plan. And over 3 months, we spent a lot of time looking at the plan, and in my infinite sort of a wisdom with the management team, we said, we inherited a good plan here, but let's just double the plan. And that was a journey when we started, particularly on acquisitions.
Okay, so we're going to come on, and this is a business now that looks like it's getting close to be worth, I don't know, £1 billion. So
keep telling me.
There's a lot happened to the business since that time. I think you brought on board, you exited Living Bridge and brought on board Vitruvian. So I'm just interested in how that transition went, and in the run-up, what the differences might have been between the two, and just if you could just talk about that area of growth and that changeover.
Well, I think from that 2016 to really 2018, we decided that we needed to, one way of growing was to do a lot of deals. And we still had to grow really fast organically, but it turns out, again, you were involved in some of these deals, you know very much well, really fragmented marketplace in the UK, relatively high addressable market, a lot of, family or mom and pop-ish style travel agencies out there, and travel businesses. And so we went around really approaching them all. Quite an unusual way of doing it. I was handwriting letters to founders, asking them whether had the privilege of having an interview for them to consider whether to sell the business to us. And we market mapped out the UK and discovered there was about 120 potential acquisitions we could make across the UK of all different size and so forth. We then went to at that time, Living Bridge, and said we probably need to refinance the company, to borrow about 100 million at that time, to sort of then go and have a fund to then start doing some acquisitions. And then we started on that sort of a journey. And over that period, I think we did something in the region of maybe 15 or 16 sort of acquisitions of lots of different various sizes. And
it was a sector, it was one of those sectors where there was a fragmented sector with maybe 3 or 4 acquirers that either private equity funded or quoted, that were all competing, wasn't it?
It was,
a bit
yeah.
of a land grab in that sector.
Yeah, and I think, if I look at the original deals and the value creation story and
Yeah.
how much we were paying and how we valued businesses back then and now, quite different. So it was a great opportunity because, we could create value quite quickly. And, within 12 months, we were creating sort of a value.
Even though, so you were paying some quite high prices, weren't you, at the time? And even then, still created
Because
value.
where we looked at the value creation was we didn't care about what we paid. I cared more about how quickly I could synergize and create value. And we had this brilliant business that had 50 million people coming to our website each year. And we had, an excess amount of demand, but we didn't have enough supply. So supply was available. So the real measure for me was within 12 months, could I buy something that was going to be synergized in terms of value creation through leveraging our traffic to less than 10 times, an earning sort of multiple. And so sometimes we paid more, but ultimately within sort of a 12 months, we could create value. And how often could we do that? How quickly could we do that?
But it's a great example of where even deals with quite full prices, could still create value because of the synergy. I think one of the other things that strikes me as I've watched the growth of this business, because I have, is that you seem to have used technology really effectively to turbocharge the business. I'd be interested in that bit of the strategy as well.
So when we decided back in 2016 to double the business in terms of the plan, so the plan, the plan we inherited as a management team, or was like I inherited as a CEO, was to get to 10,000 properties by 2020. And, my usual style was like, well, let's just double it because that sounds better. How are we going to do that? We need to do some M&A and grow organically. But we also at the same time said, well, we need to make sure everything we're doing technically, we're building and we're thinking about the business as a platform business. And we're leveraging data and we're leveraging the capability of data to sort of, to think like a platform, to be able to ingest all of these businesses that exist really quite quickly. To create the value. So we invested a hell of a lot of technology in the early days, and we got to about 250 sort of developers and engineers and product people and data science people, and that became really the sort of the core cornerstone of the ability to differentiate ourselves through technology, but obviously with our people as well through service and experience.
You describe yourself as a technology company masquerading as a holiday company. That's the way you describe yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, it depends. Depends who we're selling to and what value we want to try and get for the company in an exit process. But yeah, we do leverage technology a lot, and I think it's been one of our. We talk in our business about superpowers. One of our core superpowers in our business is the way that we think about technology, and we're always trying to get first mover advantage, and we're trying to think about scalability, because everything we're trying to do, certainly at a platform level, is to think about this business 2 or 3 times bigger than it is today. So even today, when we're 600 million plus sort of a transactions going through the business, and we take 3.5 million people on holiday, our plan is double that. So our people, our skills, the management team, the technology is always to try and double that as well. So yeah, so we leverage technology a lot. So every acquisition we made, within a defined period of time, we had to integrate it into our platform, because that was the only way we could get value, but also maintain all the brands locally. So it's one of the key differentiators. This wasn't about destroying these local brands and the local value and creating challenges for the people we're buying it from. We want to maintain them. So that's why we have a portfolio of about 23, 24 brands. We have like power brands, that have a lot of traffic, but then you have all these regional brands. But it's all driven by the same platform, the same technology to get economies of scale.
Yeah, and very impressive. So Vitruvian made their investment in 2019, and I think we can all remember what happened in 2020.
No.
I'd just be interested, would you mind talking about the challenges, the management challenges, the challenges of managing within investor relations, and just how you got through that COVID period?
Yeah, well, it was a tough time. I mean, all about timing really, because I think, we did the deal, I think it was sort of in November time. And if you remember, and again, you, KPMG, and you get involved, we had like a ready-made deal to be done as soon as we did the deal, which was to buy a portfolio of companies for about 55 million. And we sort of did that. And we actually did that. And then we're sitting in sort of a November to sort of a December, all thinking quite good, ready to start the new financial year. And then obviously we started hearing these rumors about, this thing coming from China and thinking, that will never impact us. And by the time we got to March, it was like, we have 150 million of pounds worth of transactions where we've collected the money from our customers, we have passed it on to our owners. So collected from customers, passed it on to owners, and now everybody wants it back. And no one can go on holiday. And I was taking phone calls from, members of parliament, I was taking, we were getting quite a lot of pressure. One of the things I learned is when you're big and you're the biggest, you're a target as well. And we were very much what I would call a target during that time. So it was a super, super tough period, but we were a brilliant business going into it. And, my view was we're going to be a brilliant business coming out of it. So, if I'm honest, we saw it as an opportunity to double down in investments, to double down in market share, to really say, we didn't know when we're going to come out the other side, and we had the support of our investors. I think they had bigger problems to deal with in the portfolio than us, thankfully. We've always been about protecting cash and preserving cash, so we knew we were okay. I mean, it wasn't a limitless amount of cash, and cash is king, but we were holding on to it, and so we knew we could weather the storm. But we couldn't make anybody redundant and we couldn't really use furlough as much as because we had 10,000 people a day calling us, asking for the money back. So that was really tough. So, as a management team, we became really quite resilient, 8 o'clock in the morning, we called it mini Cobra calls, dealing with it. And I'm so blown away to this day about how resilient the team were, how amazing the team were during the period, and actually how much stuff we got done.
Steve Byrne, who's the CEO of Travel Counsellors, was on our first episode of the Dealmaker Uncut podcast, and he talks about the fact that he never used the word survival. What I find interesting in obviously your business is that a lot of your business is obviously domestic as well. So the word you heard a lot during COVID was staycation, and that was right in your ballpark, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were using the word thriving. It was like surviving to thriving, although we would never really use sort of a surviving because of I guess what that sort of means. But it was more about how do you come out this stronger, better, more focused, and that was our view. And we did. We as soon as Boris Johnson started talking about people going on holiday, it was like, it was tough because you still had 5,000 or 10,000 people calling you asking for money back, and then you had another 5,000 or 10,000 people asking, "Can I go on holiday?" And it was like it put a lot of pressure on the business. But we had obviously like record year. I think we did something in the region of about 75 million EBITDA that sort of a year, which was our best, performing period ever way. I think, and foolishly, I think now we thought this is it. No one's ever going to go on planes ever again. This is going to be the future. I think everybody's fallen back in love with staying in the UK. It didn't quite pan out like that, which is another story.
I want to ask you about the D word, data, and I want to ask you about the I word, innovation, as well. Okay, so if for the benefit of the listeners who can't see your wrist, you've got one of those watches on your wrist which records all your information. Absolutely. So you collect all your blood pressure, you take your anxiety levels, it monitors your sleep. Pretty much, I
only wear the one about you.
No, absolutely. So if you fall asleep, it sets off an alarm as well. I went into your offices in Chester, and you've got a data wall where everybody in the business can see what you're doing, when you're doing it, how many bookings you're having in terms of what venues, where they're coming, how many late bookings you have. You always wanted to share that data so everybody knew it. But then on this other wall, you've got about 30, 40 old mobile phones from the original ones, and they used to be like breeze block size, like this big, and they used to cost thousands of pounds, to the tiny little mobile phones as well. And I said to you, why do you do that for? And you said 2 reasons. One, because I want people to understand how you have to innovate. But if you don't innovate, you become obsolete. Look at these relics as well. So just explain your approach to data and how you view innovation in your business.
Well, data again is another one of these superpowers. I think and I've learned over the years. I was very lucky. Money Supermarket in particular. We had 100+ people in our data science side of the team, and we were really a data-driven business. We think of data, or I think of data with my team anyway, in 3 buckets: data, which a lot of people have, insight, and action, that DNA. And so we use the data a lot, but then we have commercial people working with data intelligent people, data scientists, data engineers, to work out how you can create value and the story you can tell. And when we did the deal, the transition, from Livingbridge into Vitruvian, as you were mentioning, that was a big part of our story. We used to talk about the data flywheel, all these different things, and then we used to use the data to build product. And so, we used our data to build our own revenue management tools. We used the data to build our own search engine, sort of a platform. We use the data to build all of that insight you see on those wall boards. And what it does is it creates a heartbeat, a rhythm that people can see. And you can see when things are red, when they're green, when they're sort of amber. So it became a real sort of a superpower. And I've always been a bit geeky about data and about macros and about signals and about trends, but also about how you use that to create a competitive edge. And I think when it comes to storytelling, particularly in deal making and transactions, when we did the deal last time around, the exit, we brought my objective or the team's objective is to make it a really competitive process. We had 20 plus, people, all competing with 5, really good final round sort of the bidders. It was because we were using all of these different superpowers, then going across the globe and then talking to everybody who we knew it was interesting. So we were bringing technology acquirers in to our sort of into our sort of a portfolio as well. I think that that allowed us to have a really healthy competitive tension sort of process to maximize sort of the value, but also to give us opportunities about who we could work with.
So Vitruvian have been invested for certainly 5 years now. So you must be starting to think about the exit horizon. What I'm interested in is how much of the strategy, because you've diversified, haven't you, into a few other areas, how the diversification strategy has been developed with it, and how much thinking you've done about what the exit will be. People will often not realise how much of the plan that a private equity house will back is focused on understanding what the exit will look like.
Yeah, I mean, we try not to obsess too much around the exit at the time, but private equity forces you can't help it, because you're always on this sort of a cycle. And it's like, we've certainly lost 2 or 3 years maybe with COVID and what's gone on, and tough economic sort of a climate. But we tend to think in sort of legacy chunks and legacy sort of the steps. We tend to think. I mean, today I had a 2-hour call with my team where we were talking about a strategy session we have in a couple of weeks' time, and we're talking like, what's our story? Not over the next sort of 2 or 3 years, the next 10 years. What does that look like? And very early on, in each of the investment cycles I've been involved in, we start to think about what is our narrative, what is our story, how do we build for success, how do we create value? We do not obsess around value, around enterprise value, around, we want to be a unicorn or whatever the thing may be. We really think about like, what's the story, how do we get there? So a big part of the diversification was exactly that. We recognized that we were running out of headspace, if you want to call it, into the UK market in our core business. It was getting difficult to buy things because we'd bought almost everything, and the things that we were left to buy, there's probably some antitrust issues, or there could be some antitrust issues. Yeah, so we avoided that. We had gone international, and we'd realized and recognized that there might be 21 million properties that people rent out globally, and it might be a 105 billion market, but actually it's very different in the US, in Europe, etc. We went to New Zealand, and we are the market leader there, but we haven't really been able to scale that. So we went more horizontally into, Forest Holidays, that was a big transaction for us as a management team, hundreds of millions, but also looking at other categories and saying, what we do is we take people on holiday, we make sure they have a really good time, and we do it in a very responsible way. So where else could we play? And that became a core sort of a cornerstone. And the story we're trying to tell and the narrative we're trying to tell is all about how much headroom is there, and how good are we at that, and how can we create value?
And so and it's interesting, your market, because you effectively got 2 lots of customers, haven't you? You've got the owners, and you've got people who are visiting there. One of the things we haven't we've talked about technology, but we've not talked about AI.
Just see my face later.
Yeah, what you might see coming over the next 2 or 3 years in that regard.
Yeah, I genuinely, I am obsessed. For probably all the wrong reasons. I can just see the shift that's happening in the pace of change in AI. And we know about, Moore's law, this principle of like every year it's getting, halving in price and doubling capability. AI is blowing that out of the water. We're seeing, 4x, 10x, growth in terms of the way AI is being used. I think 2025 is going to be the year of what I would call the AI agents. So these are agents that are sort of digital agents that are actually performing tasks for you.
GP Bullhand have just done their top 10 tech predictions for the year, and number 3 was AI agents.
Was it? I mean, it's we're using it a lot in our business. We have agents handling conversations with owners, conversations with guests. We use AI in a lot of marketing technology. It's given us a real competitive advantage. We use AI in, a lot of the meetings that we have in terms of, transcribing and, producing insights and making us much more efficient. So, we've just gone through an AI maturity study where we try to, work out where are we, what does good look like, and, how do we get to, again, superpower, world class. And I think, businesses that are leaning into and learning about it, I think you can give yourself a 30% competitive advantage. And now this is not about replacing 30% of the workforce, to be clear, but when you're a growth scale business, you may not need to hire as many people at the pace that you need to hire them if you're leaning into leveraging it. If anybody wants to watch, Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, did a 1.5 hour CES presentation a few days ago. Mind-blowing, just in terms of the capability. So you can tell I'm a fan.
Yeah, fascinated to see what you do with that over the next few years.
Graham, I'm a bit worried that we're not speaking to a human being. We're speaking to an AI-generated bot, but we'll find out in the interval. So just going to go for a quick break. When we come back, Jonathan and I are going to be discussing, Graham and the story we've just heard, and then you're going to be answering some questions, Jonathan, based on your vast knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the second half of the Dealmaker Uncut podcast. We've just interviewed Graham Donoghue, CEO of Forge Holiday Group. I have to be honest with you, I'm obsessing at the moment about these Luke the Nuke darts flights that he's given me as well. So looking forward to trying them out. But beyond that, Jonathan, what was your take on what you heard from Graham?
Well, just really interesting. Obviously, this was a business that was a client of mine some time ago when we sold it to Living Bridge, and the way that they've developed that business, it has changed beyond recognition. Very interesting example of transitioning a family business into private equity ownership in a really positive way, and then the introduction of technology. So the new skills that Graham and the team have brought into the business, the introduction of technology to develop both the business, so that both for the benefit of the various stakeholders, the owners, and to make the customer journey better. I just think it's been a really great example of how private equity can drive for growth. They seem to have negotiated the COVID period quite deftly. I mean, we heard the story, but the business has come out much stronger. So I just think a really good example of value creation.
We did a story at Business Cloud. I interviewed Graham way back when, and I said, is this the best tech unicorn you haven't heard of and didn't know was a tech unicorn? I did use a little bit of journalistic license then, because we're not sure if they are a tech unicorn, but they're definitely not a million miles away. I think what you realise is they send 3.5 million people away on their holidays. That is a lot of people going on holidays, and they've got a big chunk of the market as well. What I find fascinating about their business model is they use AI hand in hand with their people. So they've got that real good people-focused element of the business, but it's fundamentally driven by technology, which is why Graham used the phrase, we're a technology company masquerading as a holiday company, but it's that technology that's really helping drive multiples. So no, I shall be fascinated to know.
They still do a good job of looking after owners of properties and people who are going on holiday as well.
Absolutely. So this is the bit when we ask you some questions, Jonathan, and you have to see how clever you really are about all things corporate finance. If you have got any questions, feel free to send them in. Jonathan, contracts can be a bit weighty in terms of the number of pages. What do you tend to look for at the end of a deal? And are there any red flags? So if you see a deal, what would be your red flags?
So I think what you're asking about are the key elements of a negotiation towards the end of a deal. When I think the question is what the type of deal is. If it's a simple sale to a trade buyer, then the issues are generally much more focused on has the buyers been seeking protections? Have they, can they rely on their due diligence, or are they trying to rely on the vendors providing warranty comfort? And often the vendors will insure themselves against that risk. When there's private equity involved, which is increasingly the case, I think often the detail is the focus is between the management team and the private equity house on the balance of power between the ongoing shareholders. And I think I often see some really important discussions between management and the private equity house on how the businesses will be operated and governed going forward.
Okay, second question. We spoke earlier when we spoke to Graham about the rise of AI. Lots of legal tech companies now who are able to cut away through these big weighty contracts and actually crystallize it to a summary. The question we've got, Jonathan, we hear a lot about AI. Are you seeing a lot of AI businesses, and is that driving up multiples?
So, as we just discussed, AI is already transforming the way businesses across the spectrum of sectors operate, and I think you neglect it at your peril. Even within corporate finance, we've been looking at we've got to the point where you can get documents produced by AI initially, or research done by AI. Every industry is going to be made more efficient by AI. Where people can really capture it, then I think there's a competitive advantage to be obtained that will be reflected in valuations. But there's an element of defensive stuff here that businesses that don't capitalise on it could fall behind quite quickly. So it's an area that is completely completely change the business world, and therefore inevitably the deal arena.
Okay, and final question, and I want to take you into the deal room right at the end of those negotiations. Is there much negotiation between buyers and sellers when it comes to concluding a deal? Do you get an element of brinksmanship?
Well, the classic issue in a deal is when most of the due diligence is done and a deal is getting close to completion. The balance of power will often swing from the vendor to the buyer. At the start of a deal, the people who are thinking of selling the business don't have to sell. They've got their business, and it's an idea. By the end, the buyer's done a whole load of due diligence. They know all about the business. The vendors have started to count the money, and the money's getting closer to arriving. And the business might have been for sale for quite a long time, and so the balance of power will often move, and it's the competitive tension what will often give the vendor the power in that bit of the negotiation. Sometimes buyers will have found information out, and they'll decide to reduce the price. You can have a small renegotiation at the end of a deal. There's often the details around completion accounts that we'll need doing at the end. But I think the main issues are around the buyer focusing on what they've learned during due diligence and deciding whether they're still happy to do the deal, or if there's any areas that they need to get protection against.
Jonathan, you after 35 years, you should know your subject, and you clearly do as well. If you've got any questions you want to ask, you want Jonathan to answer, please send them through to us via the show notes. That's all for this episode of the Dealmaker Uncut podcast, powered by Alvarez and Marcel. Final shout out to What Media and the star of the show, Jonathan Boyers. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Chris.
Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, tell your friends and family, and follow us on social media. This is the Dealmaker Uncut. Thank you for tuning in to the Dealmaker Uncut podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. We'll catch you in the next episode of the Dealmaker Uncut podcast.